And so we look at it through the lens of, is this company well positioned to give us a return of a 3 to 5x is typically our target in 3 to 5 years. But the other lens, which we look to it, is strategic. So is the company strategic to us, and can we be strategic to them? And one of the things that we've learned and seen over the years, if we don't have KOLs that meet with the company and come back to us and say, okay, yeah, I'm really interested in this, it can be the most investable deal we've seen. We will not invest unless we get that reaction.
This is the MedTech Startup Podcast, and today we are in Malta, where we are going to get into the head, the heart, and the gut of this MedTech investor. We're with Anita Watkins, the managing director of Rex Health Ventures out of North Carolina. We're going to jump into the story here, but first and foremost, I want to say thank you very much, Anita, for being with us here today, all the way in Malta.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So today we really wanted to cover what it means to be a health system venture arm, and how do these hospital systems actually become these venture options that these entrepreneurs typically don't even know about, the history behind them, et cetera. But before we get into that whole idea and talking about these options that these entrepreneurs have, we really want to learn about you. And then we're going to jump into what Rex Health Ventures is. And then we're going to talk holistically about what these hospital health venture arms do and how these entrepreneurs can find them.
Great.
So let's kick it off. Anita, who are you? Where do you come from? How did you do everything in your life leading all the way up through academia, professionalism, to the point where you became the managing director of Rex Health Ventures here with us today in Malta?
Well, and thank you for having me. So I'm originally from North Carolina. I'm in my home state, my hometown, working for a university system that has been a big part of my life and my career. So I'm pretty honored to serve in the role that I have. And who am I? I'm an attorney by training and spent about 20 years in public policy. Before jumping into venture, I actually represented the university system and then moved over to the healthcare system and found myself in this role of helping build and develop a strategy for really where we started was an innovation arm. And venture was a piece of it, but innovation was the key focus. What we had in mind were 3 goals that have really held true for the almost 12 years since we launched the fund. So we wanted to build a culture of innovation within the health system, help diversify investments, and also provide our executives, operators, and clinicians early access to the most cutting-edge technology to improve patient outcomes. And those have held true. And our investments all have a piece of one of those or all 3 of those over the 12 years that we've been investing.
So we're going to jump into Rex Health Ventures at this point. Thank you very much for sharing that. But 12 years ago, UNC decided about Rex Health Ventures and just to create this innovation arm?
Yeah, we originally called it Rex Strategic Innovation. So to get some context, UNC Healthcare is a large health system in North Carolina, but Rex is the largest community hospital. And we've particularly wanted to start within the community hospital setting because that's where the majority of care is provided. While UNC has a world-renowned academic medical center based in Chapel Hill, there's only about 50 medical centers in the United States where there are over 3,000 community hospitals, and that is where the majority of care takes place. And we felt like if we looked at companies from an innovation lens and also an investment lens from the community hospital perspective, then we're going to get a better sense of scalability, applicability, rather than a very specialized care that might be provided in the medical center. So we started it at Rex, hence the name, which often confuses people why we're not UNC Ventures, but it's where we started and it's where our roots are, but we do represent the entire university health system.
Very cool. So from an investment standpoint, imagine we're talking to all the medical device entrepreneurs or medtech entrepreneurs, and I know, and we'll get into it, but I know that you guys do more than that. But focusing on medtech for a second here, we're going to be speaking with all these entrepreneurs and teaching them about how hospital venture arms actually exist in this ecosystem for them to have optionality with that. So my question for you would be, how do you guys invest? What we want to tell these entrepreneurs to think about? Because if they are thinking about more of the traditional, okay, I can raise from high net worth individuals like angels, and I've heard of this thing, or maybe this is where I'm at now in the status of my current company where I'm raising from venture capital, right? So it's either angels, high net worth individuals, or venture capital, but there's all these other optionalities that most of them don't understand or are even aware of. So hospital health venture arms, how do they fit into the equation, and how does specifically Rex Health Ventures invest?
I hear your question is kind of two parts, kind of what advice to give to those CEOs and also where we invest. So I'm going to start with the advice side. One of the advantages of working with a fund like ours is that we provide that insight on workflow, on usability, on the incumbent perhaps devices and what it might take to replace those incumbent devices. Things that really need to be thought through on the very early stages of the device design and well before you get to commercialization and manufacturing. So what I suggest on the med tech side, companies that they come to funds like ours, and there's a lot of us that invest on the medical device side, come to ours fairly early on. Even if you're not quite ready for an investment, we're there to provide advice and guidance on what we've seen in your particular space in the past, perhaps connect you with clinicians that can become advisors, for example, on point of care or something, a device that might be used in the lab or something that's applicable in pharmacy. Having access to those experts really early on to talk about this is what we need. Here are our pain points, and you're solving this piece of it. Can you also solve that piece of it? So that they can get that holistic picture in mind early on. And then while we tend to invest on the med device side, right around commercialization, we'll invest pre-FDA approval if there's a clear regulatory pathway. But oftentimes we found that we can be most strategic when we invest right around commercialization to really help grow and scale the company.
Going back to investing more closer to that commercial stage, like what types of checks are we talking about? And also, we've heard from previous stories that these hospital venture arms often act like almost like a corporate venture arm where they could invest off their balance sheet. Is it a set fund or is it an evergreen fund? How does that work?
So ours is an evergreen fund. So we launched actually fairly small amounts back in 2012 with $10 million. And then it was, let's give this a try. We've been very fortunate that we've had some really, really good outcomes, and our board has been very supportive. So over the years, we've had additional funds allocated to us, and we were able to reinvest our proceeds. So it's given us quite a bit of runway. So we're not looking to, we're going to be out of money in the next 3 years. What are we going to do? We're really looking the long horizon, and it allows us to really focus on finding the right deals and the right companies to partner with.
I want to go back to the innovation piece. So you started off as an innovation arm and it turned into a venture.
Mm-hmm.
You and I have talked about this before, this notion of in versus outward, or inward versus outward, or outward versus inward. Were you creating on the UNC campus first and then looking to make external investments, or how did that work out?
So the School of Medicine and the University of North Carolina have tech transfer arms. They have innovation funds to really help that early ideation. So our fund, from a complementary perspective, we developed the fund to really focus on outside in, with a recognition that we have, not just in the US, but all over the world, as we're sitting here in Malta, there are companies and ideas out there that we don't have access to. And this was a vehicle to bring as many of those ideas into the UNC system to enhance the incredible research and innovation that's already going on there. While we have invested in companies that have spun out of UNC, we have primarily been an outside fund. And I like that focus, because while we have this, again, this incredible academic center where new therapeutics and new devices and new research is being developed each and every day. It creates, I believe our fund has created this symbiotic relationship with the health system of really building on that innovation culture, that by introducing companies and founders and thinkers that otherwise wouldn't be exposed to the UNC system until way late in the process when somebody shows up on a sales call.
But what's the need of that innovation? So, 12 years ago when you started this, is a hospital system needing something that it wasn't getting, which is the reason why you started this innovation arm? And then even taking that further, like you said, looking on that outside-in approach, even on the innovation piece, you were looking to then get out what is developed externally from the campus. So what is that actual need for what the hospital needed 12 years ago and to why this was all created?
So I think the genesis of this came down to David Strong, who's now president and CEO of Orlando Health, and some physicians that he recruited in that had done their training at Cleveland Clinic and other places. And they saw the richness that the community hospital environment created and essentially said, why aren't we first for testing out TAVR? Why aren't we first for having access to this new medical device for our patients? And so it was really the genesis of, we've got so much talent here. We've got the environment that's perfect for testing. Why can't we put something in place to draw those companies to us so that we can really get our hands on those devices first and improve our patient outcomes?
So then that outside in and inside out model, going to the ecosystem, I don't know, you mentioned that Rex Health Ventures has been around for 12 years. I've heard of others come on, I don't want to say recently, but we have OSF Ventures, we have University Hospital System Ventures over in Cleveland, Mayo Clinic, Providence. We have all these other ones, but is the concept of having a hospital system creating its own venture arm, is that a fairly new concept, or are there more coming about more recently?
So absolutely. I think the last 5 years has seen maybe explosion is a little bit of an exaggeration, but we created a group about 2018 called Strategic Venture Group, SVG, Strategic Venture Group, where there was 10, 12 of us. And really, when we started the fund, we were looking to Ascension, Kaiser, Mayo, some of the ones that have been around a long time to model ourselves after the few that were in the market at the time. And now I believe we have calls monthly with all of the health system funds. And I believe we've gotten up to about in the 40s of different health system funds. And they range from, some don't actually have a fund. They want to create a fund. And some have been, investing for 15, 20 years. So there's a huge range, but certainly there's been quite a bit of growth in the space over the last 5 years.
So let's go back to the MedTech entrepreneurs who may be listening in right now at various stages, probably a lot of them in their earlier stages, and they have their pitch decks and they're clicking send on the emails to all these various styles of investors. And you mentioned that they're all different, but where do health system venture arms fit into that equation for them? If they are exploding, if they are becoming more of an option for these entrepreneurs to see and hear about and learn about, why should they be going after hospital venture arms? And then the different styles or the different stages, like for example, you invest towards the commercial stage. Are there others that go earlier stage? Let's talk about that to help them learn.
So absolutely. So there's a smaller group of us that really focus on med tech and med device. Of those, there are some that like to get in really, really early. They like to be that first investor to help with the ideation, with the device design. But most of them are going to invest right around the commercialization stage. Again, because that's where we can really add the most value. We can give access to the value analysis committees and what that looks like to get through that process. We have clinicians that are ready to be that first user and test the device. We have those clinicians that can help with training models. All of the devices have to have some element of training. And we've got those clinicians that can kind of walk the companies through, here's what training should and could look like. And it needs to be, something that's very simplistic, especially if we're replacing a procedure we've been doing for 10 years. We are a good partner to have in this. For example, a company we invested in several years ago called Gauss Surgical is an AI-driven medical device company focused on maternal hemorrhage. Really, really interesting company. 9 health systems funds invested in that company together. And I know from the Rex Health Venture side, our head of labor and delivery helped them work in protocols of steps to take as you're measuring maternal hemorrhage, steps to take to help mitigate what's going on with the mom and the baby and to make sure that you get a better outcome. So the strategic advice and access for these med device companies can be really, really meaningful. And that company was acquired by Stryker.
Do hospital venture arms, and even specifically Rex Health, do you guys lead, or is it constantly a follow-on, or do you need to have a syndicate always?
A lot of the health system funds will not lead.
Okay.
We'll co-lead. The syndicate I like to see, especially if we're leading or co-leading, is a mix of other funds like ours, institutional funds that can really bring all of that guidance and expertise and know-how to the table. We recently invested in a company where the syndicate had all of those elements to it. Some of the institutional funds have really been able to help bring talent to the table and help identify people for those key positions. And we've been able to give that insight and advice and access to the KOLs within the health system.
I want to go back to the point that you made that was really interesting. A lot of these hospital systems are focusing on digital health. I mean, we're talking about MedTech, of course, but at the same time, we can't act like digital health doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And digital health, I mean, still to this day is somewhat nebulous, to be honest with you. I mean, I know that there's a Center for Digital Health that has been created by the FDA, but depending on who you talk to, it could be just as regulated as the hardcore medical devices that we all know and talk about. And other times it could also be like a wellness product and a very different commercial path. So what is keeping these hospital venture arms more focused, let's say, on digital health versus the hardcore heart valve, for example?
So less regulatory risk. I don't want to speak for the funds that are focused on digital health, but my sense is those health systems feel like that's their pathway to help really move their healthcare system to a more digital world. Being able to care for patients remotely. There's so many applications, as you just noted, so many applications of digital health. We couldn't cover them all during this conversation, but that's my sense of why some health systems have really focused on the digital health space.
Okay.
And then also, there are some health systems, their funds, they will only do certain classes of medical devices. And it comes down to a risk tolerance standpoint. They might not feel comfortable taking the risk on something that's implantable, but they feel perfectly fine taking a risk on a wearable. So I think it also comes down to risk tolerance within the health system fund.
I ask these questions because I'm trying to learn. When we think about a hospital system, yes, they want to change and they want to digitize and they want to make things smoother. When we think about hospitals, you don't get a artificial heart valve on the street or anywhere else. Like you go to the hospital system. So that's where those patients will be. At the end of the day, yes, it is about risk, especially on the regulatory side. But when we think about what products could be used to save lives versus iterative or augmenting lives, and do hospital systems like to get into the hard stuff that could actually help surgery or help these interventional procedures?
We do. That's certainly something that when we set up, actually, when we launched the fund, we thought we would be majority digital health. It was 2011, 2012. It was kind of the coming of age of digital health applications. But what we found was that our expertise lied more in the med device and therapeutic space. So while we've invested in digital health companies, we really feel like our sweet spot is more in the therapeutic and the medical device, med tech, tech-enabled services. And that being able to work directly with our clinicians that would use the device. One of the things that I like from an investor standpoint is there are 5 physicians that may use a particular device. Getting all of their feedback is a much different process than a digital health application that's going to be used enterprise-wide. The amount of conversations needed to really understand how we would use and implement and put in place a digital health application can be really, really complex.
So then, is it fair to say that when you talk about the health system venture arms, they truly are looking at a risk reward situation where they also are trying to take less risks and be able to bring in products that are more capable of speed to clearance or usability in a commercial setting? Or is this something that if they don't decide that they're going to bring it into their own hospital system, are they looking for a return on investment as an actual cash investor would, like an institutional, for example?
So that's a great question. And one of the things that's really, really important in our process is when we look at a potential investment, we look at it through 2 lenses. One is the financial return. From that perspective, we're not a granting agency. We are a fund, and our fund depends on returns. And so we look at it through the lens of, is this company well positioned to give us a return of a 3 to 5x is typically our target in 3 to 5 years. But the other lens through which we look through it is strategic. So is the company strategic to us, and can we be strategic to them? So from that perspective, it is, can they be strategic to us? Are they filling a need that our health system has? And one of the things that we've learned and seen over the years, if we don't have KOLs that meet with the company and come back to us and say, okay, yeah, I'm really interested in this, it can be the most investable deal we've seen. We will not invest unless we get that reaction. So what's important is, and what's important also for the CEOs to understand, is that partnering with us is truly a partnership. We are there to help create a company that can grow and scale and can bring the innovation to us to help fill a real need. So it's really a wonderful relationship and a wonderful process when we find that right fit.
So is it fair to say that the physicians actually do, I don't want to say call the shots realistically, but that's your litmus test, your beta test, where you can have an investable company, like you said, with a great technology, but if it's not for those physicians in your hospital health system that are saying, yes, if we could get this over the line, I would use it, that's really where your yes or no spectrum comes from.
Certainly on the med device side, I would say really any type of company, but on the medical device in particular, if the physician's just kind of like, well, that's interesting, it's a pass for us. We have to see that. And not only do our physicians need to react that way, but in our diligence process, we talk to every health system that has looked at the device or potentially already used the device to get their physicians' feedback as well. And that all of those, we need to see some excitement and some true energy behind the physicians and their review of the company before we'll invest.
You bring up that word diligence or due diligence. I definitely wanted to jump in on that one because once again, for these earlier stage entrepreneurs who are sometimes reactively looking for cash, they have a few months left, or their burn rate and their run rate is short. It's 6 months or less. And they're raising right now. And we just came off of a very difficult time of the economy, hopefully, and it feels like it is warming up, so keep our fingers crossed. But we've heard, once again, stories of corporate venture capital, and I'll throw it out there, J&J or Abbott or whatever it may be. They can take their time during a due diligence process. And if you're down to 2 or 3 months cash and you're going after a corporate strategic, it's probably not your best bet. Angels, it's their money. They could be nimble. They could be an emotional investor and say, hey, I just love what you guys are doing, and write a check the same week or the same day. Sometimes the angel groups, we've also heard that they have a little song and dance and a little process going that could also take months. In terms of timing, so once again, so these entrepreneurs can learn how hospital systems work, even if they do vary, what's your typical diligence process? Like, how long does that really take? Is it a slower process? Can you guys move quickly?
So we could certainly move quickly. I would advise any company not to get down to 3 months of cash, particularly in this market, because everyone's taking longer, not just your traditional funds or funds like ours. Everyone's taking longer to make decisions because the market is difficult right now. But I would say for our diligence process, we typically want about 6 to 8 weeks to get through the whole process. We can move quicker if we need to, but that tends to be what our process takes. We have a really engaged investment committee. It's one of the keys to our success, I believe. I say that pretty much anytime I talk about our fund. It's the level of engagement we have with our investment committee is really, really meaningful, and it's an important part of our process. So we want to make sure that we have time. These are busy executives. We have the president of Rex. We have the CEO of the system. We have the CFO of the system on our investment committee. So while we have standing meetings, we want to make sure to have the time to get the company in front of them. They can ask the questions they have, where we incorporate that into our diligence process, and then get back to them for a potential vote. We can move quick, but we ask that any company not come to us with, hey, we're closing in 4 weeks. Typically, even if it's an exciting company, I'll just pass at that point. It's not in either of our interests to move that quickly to make sure that we are creating the right partnership.
Do you guys take board seats as well?
We do. In fact, most of our companies, we at least have a board observer seat. We have found, and the CEOs often welcome, even if we're not one of the larger checks, they welcome our presence on the board, whether it's in a board seat or observer seat, so we can continue to deliver on that strategic value.
When it comes to specifically Rex Health, you do invest in more things than medical devices. Mm-hmm. What are some of those things?
So we really invest all across the healthcare spectrum. And the way we have thought about it historically is if we have expertise within the health system, then we'll take a look at the company. If we don't, then our diligence is going to be limited to the financial side. And it also probably means that we can't be strategic to the company. So we invest in therapeutics as long as we have physicians that have expertise in that space. Typically, they tend to be repurposed drugs, just because the amount of capital required fits better with our investment thesis. We invest in device, tech-enabled services, diagnostics. What we have found is being opportunistic and not artificially defining really led us to some of the best opportunities and best outcomes.
It's an overgeneralization, I'm sure, but when you look at that portfolio, and once again, either it could be for Rex or it could be for how hospital systems think in general, what does that breakdown look like?
So it's typically about a third. So a third on the therapeutic side, a third in the medical device, MedTech space, and then a third in the tech-enabled services and true health IT.
So if I was a medical device investor and I have my technology, hearing from what you've been sharing with us so far, if it comes down to these physicians, will they use it? Will they not use it? What happens if I went to a conference or through networking, I found this physician and it happened to be part of the Rex Health system, UNC system, and he or she loved my technology? Would they champion it to the venture arm and bring that to your attention?
We welcome that approach. We have somebody bringing a company to us that they're excited about. That's meaningful. That versus us having a company that me and one of my colleagues find and we bring it to the physician. It's just it's a different process, and certainly a different diligence process. They're having to get not only up to speed on the company and what they're doing, but they have to meet the management team. There's a whole process. So when the companies actually engage with our physicians and the physicians are bringing that company to us, that's one that's going to get prioritized higher.
What's your advice, or how do these entrepreneurs find these physicians that champion their devices?
Getting on the podium at many conferences as possible that specialize in their area, or partnering with a physician to get on the podium, or at least have your your paper presented in some way. One of the keys for us is there's got to be clinical data. There's got to be substantive clinical data to show that this is, not just another Me Too in the device space, that there's meaningful changes in outcomes for the patients. Otherwise, the incentive to use it, especially if you're already using a device in that space or already doing a procedure in that space, the incentive to change what you're doing is that's really hard to overcome.
So I'll lean on your law background, and I'm probably speaking for a bunch of entrepreneurs, and I hear this very regularly. So I'll call it a class action question. But these ideas of investors coming in at this commercial stage, I hear personally a lot of these entrepreneurs saying, and they get frustrated about it. They say, "It's great that you want clinical data. I appreciate that you want clinical data. I want to have clinical data, but I need capital to be able to generate the clinical data." How do you solve that?
So I think seeking as much non-dilutive funding as possible, and that is hard in the med device space, but really tapping into as much non-dilutive funding as you can find to generate that clinical data. Finding those early champions who are willing to run those initial clinical trials for you is important. And I think part of that is identifying, depending on the space you're in, but really identifying those centers of expertise. So if, whether you're in the heart and vascular space, the acute kidney injury space, or identifying those centers of excellence and really engaging with those clinicians. I recognize it's really hard because a lot of these physicians are, their doors are knocked on every single day virtually, but they're being pitched by companies all the time, and it's hard to get their time and attention. I think finding that those early champions, as hard as it is the real key to success. Because if you can't bring clinical data, there's a company we're looking at right now that's really, really interesting. Created a device for a procedure that's fairly hard to do right now, so those patients don't have great outcomes. And this would create a much simpler way for those patients to have essentially a non-invasive procedure to correct their current health issue. But they, when I shared it with my docs, they're like, "Well, this would be great. So how many patients has it been used on?" And they can't take the risk, of a device that's only been used on 7 or 8 patients. So I think trying to find those champions that will early on take your animal data and translate it to human really is going to be key for a successful investment from a fund like ours.
I'm going to plead ignorance on this again. So I hear that you come in at the commercial stages, and I'm once again trying to represent and speak to this entrepreneurial audience that's hopefully listening in now. Is walk me through how this works. So I know as an entrepreneur, I'm going to have to get FDA clearance or approval, and that's really only the green light to then be able to commercialize. That's when the game really begins. But then allegedly, especially if Rex Health was on my cap table or on my board, there's clearly clinicians that are willing and ready and interested in using it. So from your experience, and Gauss Surgical or another example that you have, just walk us through this chronological line of identify an investment opportunity. You invest in that opportunity. You hang on tight until FDA clearance or commercialization, however short or long that phase is. And then once it is ready and willing and able to be sold or commercialized, is it, forget about hiring the sales force for that immediate company. Right now, we have 5 docs that are ready to use this in the hospital system right now, and it's cleared. So just give us the product and we can put it to use. How does that work? How does that whole chronological process happen?
Typically the rounds we would come in from med device, one of the uses of funds is to hire a sales force, whether you're partnering or hiring your own direct sales force. So it's rare that you have enough docs that are ready to use it that you can say, we'll just start generating revenue from these couple of docs. we'd want to see an investment and a strategy to make sure that they're going to hit the revenue targets that they can and should within the first couple of years. But it does help to have those early adopters because they're reference customers. We'll use that as an example. I knew early on from my head of labor and delivery that she was very concerned about the number of transfusions that our moms were experiencing based on maternal hemorrhage. And so her excitement about having a way to actually measure blood loss during labor and to intervene quickly was really important. So I knew she was going to put the technology in place as quickly as possible. But we couldn't rest on the fact that 9 Health System is invested and that was going to build the commercial base for this company. We had to really help them build their sales force and grow and scale and use those health system investors as their reference customers.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to wrap up and just once again put a conclusion on all this. If I'm a MedTech entrepreneur, and I've learned a lot from this conversation on where hospital health system venture arms exist on the spectrum of optionality for me, why should I consider wanting them on my cap table? I know that even you mentioned in the syndicate, you're talking about having other health systems in there, usually institutionals. So that forces me to have to look at this whole gamut. But why should I really consider hospital systems to be part of my future as I develop, and also my investor syndicate?
It's a great question, and it's one that every CEO should ask themselves. You should pick your investors very, very wisely and make sure that they are true partners. And not all health system funds, even if they've got the KOLs, even if they have the right set of patients to fit your device, if you can't find that partnership, they're probably not the investor you want to work with. So it is a question that every CEO should ask very critically, and to find those investors that can help them grow and scale, that they're there as a partner, not an adversary. They're a partner, and their objective is certainly for all of us, it's going to be a return, but it is going to be to help that company grow to the next level. And I believe that my colleagues, like our fund, that's our objective. We don't have the LPs that we're answering to. We are our own GP, we're our own LP. What we're really focused and intent on is improving health care and improving patient outcomes.
And that's my final question. And the perfect segue is, what's in it for Rex Health Ventures? So when I think about it, yes, you're investing in technology that hopefully can actually benefit the hospital system from an actual patient usability perspective. But also, if there's an exit, there's capital returned. But the way it sounds, and I don't want to call it a nonprofit, but does that go right back into the fund to go invest into the next one? Or is it like this 20% carry that you hear with this institutional investors? Like, where's the rub on that?
So it goes back to why we started and what as I mentioned, these 3 fundamental principles have held true. Diversify investments. Yes, we have demonstrated a very healthy return for the health system in times like this when margins are really tight. While we're not adding a ton to that bottom line, we are helping support all of those entities across the health system that are really struggling right now. So diversify investments, help build a culture of innovation. It's gets folks excited. I've had executives tell me that when we engage with them on a company, it's their favorite part of their job. And I imagine if you think about what COVID put health systems through and what the current economic crisis is putting health systems through, when you bring somebody an opportunity to think innovatively and differently about what they do on a day-to-day basis, it does help build that culture of innovation. And then the third is to provide that early access. All 3 of those have held true. And those are what drive us on a day-to-day basis and helping to find companies to invest and partner with.
I want to say thank you very much to Anita Watkins, the managing director of Rex Health Ventures over at UNC in North Carolina. And today we got into the head, the heart, and the guts of this particular MedTech and health system investor. Thank you very much for coming with us, Anita. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here with us in Malta.
Wonderful to meet you.